May 18th, 1974, 8:05 a.m., Pokhran, Rajasthan. Over 100 meters underground, a nuclear device was about to detonate. The scientists were watching with hopes. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had staked India's reputation at this moment, and the world has no idea what's coming. And then the ground shook, sending shockwave through the desert. Dust filled the air, and just like that, India became a nuclear power. And it was a statement to the world that we have arrived. India could protect itself. But 50 years later, when the world talks about nuclear superpower, India's name barely comes up. With over 10,000 nuclear weapons combined, Russia and the United States together control nearly 90% of all the nuclear weapons on Earth. India having 180 is not even in the top 5. So the question is, why after 50 years of having nuclear weapons and after building them completely on our own, why is India still not considered a nuclear superpower? And the answer to this is a story about perception, about power, and a political game that was against us from the very beginning.
Today, at 15:45 hours, India conducted 3 underground nuclear tests in the Pokhran range.
Nuclear superpower. See, nuclear power isn't just about building bombs. Anyone with enough scientists and uranium can actually do that. What separates a nuclear country from a nuclear superpower comes down to 3 things: scale, delivery, and credibility. First, scale. The United States has 5,177 nuclear warheads. Russia has 5,459. Between these two countries alone, you're looking at over 10,000 warheads, which is nearly 90% of all the nuclear weapons on the planet. That's not just having a weapon, that's having an arsenal so massive that the world has no choice but to take you seriously. For context, just one B-83 missile blast from the US arsenal can actually cause 1.3 million deaths. And the US has estimated 650 of these. Imagine. Second, delivery capability. The US has something called as a nuclear triad, which means that there are 3 different ways of attacking you from anywhere on the planet. They have land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles like the Minuteman III that can be launched from America and hit targets 13,000 kilometers away in under 30 minutes. In the oceans all over the world, they have nuclear-powered submarines like the Ohio class, each carrying enough firepower to turn multiple cities to dust. And then they have strategic bombers like the B-2 Spirit that can actually fly undetected across continents and drop nuclear payloads wherever they want. So no matter where you are in this world, no matter how you try to defend yourself, the US can actually reach you. Third, and this is the most important one, credibility. Credibility means the world actually believes you will use this weapon if pushed. The United States is the only country in the world in the history to have ever used a nuclear weapon in the war.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy.
We all remember Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, right? Over 200,000 people died in seconds. The trauma still haunts the survivors, so much so that they have a specific name for them, Hibakusha. They endure lifelong struggle with sickness from radiation, severe emotional pain, and many of them were actually shunned by the society. And that's not just a historical fact, that is a psychological weapon. Every country on earth knows that America has done it once, which means that they can do it again if the red line is crossed. And that's credibility. But beyond all of this firepower and credibility, there is one more factor that can actually make matter even worse. And it's not about weapons at all. We'll get to that in a minute. But when you look at India, we have built our own triad. We have got credible firepower, and we have been nuclear power for 50 years now. But even after this, we are still not in the superpower conversation. So what's missing? To understand that, you need to understand how we got here in the first place. Section 2, India's journey. So in 1947, India gained independence. The country was dealing with partition, poverty, and building a nation from scratch. But they also had their eyes on the future. So in 1948, just 1 year after independence, India established the Atomic Energy Commission with Dr. Homi Bhabha as its chairman. And the vision was peaceful nuclear research. In the 1950s, the United States launched atoms for Peace, a program to share nuclear technology with developing countries for peaceful purposes. Canada supplied India with a research reactor called CIRUS, and India built the Baba's Atomic Research Center in Mumbai to run this program. But there was a secret that nobody wanted India to find out. CIRUS produces plutonium as a byproduct, weapon-graded plutonium, meaning that India can actually make their own nuclear bomb. But India stuck to the peaceful approach. Then in 1964, China tested its first nuclear bomb, and suddenly India's neighbor, the country that just defeated us 2 years ago, has the most dangerous weapon on earth. And this changed everything. India needed to protect itself, so Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri quietly approved the nuclear explosion project. And then in 1966, two of the main people of the nuclear program, Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri and Dr. Homi Bhabha, died under mysterious circumstances. But the effort went on. The plutonium from CIRUS was extracted and processed. A device was designed, and everything happened under the extreme secrecy, because if Canada or America found out, they would cut off the support immediately. And by 1974, the device was ready. May 18th, 1974, India detonated its first nuclear device, the Smiling Buddha, at Pokhran. Indira Gandhi called it a peaceful nuclear explosion. Nobody actually believed it. Canada cut all the nuclear cooperations, America imposed sanctions. In 1975, nuclear supplier countries formed a special group specifically because of what India did, and the aim was to control exports so no other country could bypass the system again. So India was now completely isolated. But the program didn't stop. Through the 1980s and 1990s, Indian scientists continued working on their own, developing delivery systems and refining weapon designs. By the 1998, India had a new government under Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. In May, India conducted 5 nuclear tests at Pokhran in 3 days. And this time, there was no pretending. India declared itself as a nuclear weapons state openly. But this time, slowly, the world starts to accept reality. India has nuclear weapons and isn't giving them up. By 2008, the United States and India signed a civil nuclear agreement. The nuclear supplier group gave India a special waiver allowing civilian nuclear trade, even though India never signed the NPT. It wasn't full membership, but it was recognition. Today, India has about 180 nuclear warheads, missiles that can reach anywhere in Asia, nuclear submarines patrolling the ocean, and the best part is that we have built all of this under sanctions with no outside help. Section 3, the real reason. By the late 1960s, the United States and the Soviet Union had built enough nuclear weapons to destroy all of mankind. And then in 1968, these two countries, who had spent 23 years turning nuclear bombs into an industry enterprise, suddenly developed conscience. So now they decided the world needed rules. If every country starts building nukes, nuclear war becomes inevitable. So the 5 countries that already had nuclear weapons, the US, Russia, UK, France and China, came together and created Non-Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, which is called as NPT. And the treaty promised 3 things. First, countries without nuclear weapons agrees that they will never develop them. Second, the 5 nuclear powers promise to eventually destroy all their nuclear weapons. And third, everyone gets access to peaceful nuclear technology under international inspection. Sounds fair, right? The nuclear power disarm and everyone else agrees not to build weapons. Except that's not what happened. The 5 nuclear power never disarmed. They modernized them. The US is spending over $200 billion on a new long-range bomber and developing a new long-range standoff cruise missile. Russia allocated 10 to 15% of its 19 trillion ruble defense budget, roughly $325 billion, specifically to modernizing its nuclear triad between 2011 and 2020. They actually deployed them overseas. Russia deploys tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus and maintains 5 nuclear storage sites in Western Russia aimed at Europe. The US is even building a new bomb, the B-6112, with a yield of up to 50 kilotons, more than 3 times the power of Hiroshima bomb. Today, the US deploys 1,419 strategic warheads and Russia deploys 1,549 on hundreds of bombers and missiles. Both countries are upgrading these delivery platforms right now. Together, the US and Russia still controls 90% of all the nuclear weapons on the planet. So the promise of disarmament, it never actually happened. Meanwhile, every other country that signed the NPT is legally banned from ever developing nuclear weapons. The treaty created a permanent hierarchy. 5 countries get to keep their weapons forever and everyone else is locked out. Like in June 2025, USA deployed bunker buster bombers to strike Iran's underground nuclear facilities. The US claimed Iran was actually stockpiling enough uranium to build 9 nuclear bombs, so it decided to destroy them before Iran could actually weaponize them. India saw this coming in 1968 and said no, not just because the treaty was discriminatory, but because India faced a legitimate threat from China, a country that was now one of the 5 nuclear powers that the NPT would legally recognize. So India refused to accept a world order where its nuclear-armed enemy neighbor would be permanently protected while India would be permanently powerless. And the global system punished them for it. In 1975, the major nuclear supplier countries held a meeting in London and created the Nuclear Supplier Group, NSG. The entire purpose of this group was to control the export of the nuclear materials and the technology to prevent any country from doing what India just did. So for 34 years, from 1974 to 2008, India was locked out of the global nuclear market. No access to uranium, no access to reactor components, no access to dual-use technologies. Indian scientists had to develop everything in the house, and India did it anyway. By 1998, India had a functional nuclear arsenal and declared itself as a nuclear weapons state. The world condemned India again. Sanctions followed, but this time something changed. The world realized India wasn't going to back down. India's economy was too large to ignore, and India's nuclear program was too advanced to reverse. And India's strategic importance, especially as a counterweight to China, was too valuable to dismiss. So India is still not an NSG member. The waiver allows India to trade, but India cannot vote on nuclear export rules. India can cooperate and collaborate with nuclear powers, but it isn't officially recognized as one. And India still hasn't signed the NPT because signing it now would actually mean legally giving up all your weapons at a time where danger is coming from all sides. This is the real reason India cannot be a nuclear superpower. But the interesting part is, India never wanted to be one. Section 5, not a superpower. Today, India has approximately 180 nuclear warheads and a complete nuclear triad, meaning India can actually launch nuclear weapons from land, air and sea. On land, India has the Agni series of ballistic missiles, ranging from the short-range Agni-V to Agni-V, which can travel over 5,000 kilometers and carry multiple independent targetable warheads. In the air, India has nuclear-capable aircraft like the Mirage 2000 and Rafale, but the most important part of India's triad is the sea-based nuclear capability. This is where India has made some of the most significant advancement in the last decade. India operates the INS Arihant, which is a nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine, or SSBN. What makes this submarine so critical is that it can stay underwater for months at a time, completely hidden from enemy surveillance. It carries submarine-launched ballistic missiles that can reach up to 3,500 kilometers. And because these submarines are nearly impossible to track once they are submerged, they provide what's called a second strike capability, meaning even if an enemy manages to destroy all of India's land-based missile and aircraft in a first strike, the submarine will still be out there ready to retaliate. Only 5 countries in the entire world have a fully operational nuclear triad: the United States, Russia, China, France, and now India. And the best part is that India built all of this under sanctions with made in India technology without external help. So on paper, India has everything it needs to be a nuclear superpower. But here's the twist. So India's stand on nuclear weapons has never been about aggression. When India declared itself as a nuclear state in 1998, it announced a doctrine called credible minimum deterrence. This means that India will keep just enough nuclear weapons to deter attacks, but not more than necessary. No arms race, no stockpiling like the US and the Soviet Union did during the Cold War. The second pillar is the no first use. India has pledged it will never be the first to use nuclear weapons in a conflict. India's nuclear arsenal exists only for retaliation if India is attacked first. Compare that to the US and Russia, both of which reserves the right to use nuclear weapons first and keep thousands of warheads on hair-triggered alert ready to launch in minutes. India doesn't do that. This is a defensive doctrine, not an offensive one. But if India is attacked with nuclear weapons, the response will be devastating. India's doctrine promises massive retaliation, overwhelming nuclear force designed to inflict unacceptable damage on the attacker. India also reserves the right to respond with nuclear weapons if attacked with chemical or biological weapon. The message is very clear. India won't strike first, but if you force India to strike back, you won't survive. India is not interested in projecting power but only wants to protect its borders. This can be seen from our weapons too. India's Agni-V can reach 5,000 to 7,000 kilometers, enough to hit every major city in China and Pakistan, but not Washington, Moscow or London. And that is intentional. India doesn't deploy nuclear weapons overseas like the US or Russia do. Why this restraint? Because trying to match the superpowers bomb for bomb would bankrupt India's economy. Instead, India built enough to deter attacks and focus the rest on economic growth. The result? India is now the world's fourth largest economy. So all the superpowers measures power by how many cities they can destroy. But India measures the power by how many it can build. And that's the paradox. The NPT says that India can't be a nuclear superpower. But India's doctrine says it won't be one. Because it rejects the entire logic. India has the ability to destroy, but it chooses the wisdom not to. Maybe that's the truest form of power. But that is not to say that we have stopped progressing. Section 6, the future. India is modernizing aggressively. The Agni-V now carries MIRVs tested in March 2024, carrying 3 warheads per missile. The Agni-6 is in development with 8,000 to 12,000 kilometers range and up to 10 MIRVs warhead. India has also successfully tested its first hypersonic missile in November 2024 with a range over 1,500 kilometers. Even India's submarine fleet is expanding. INS Arihant and INS Arihant are operational. INS Arihant commissions in 2025 and a 4th SSBN is under construction. Beyond that, India approved building 9 nuclear attack submarines SSNs in 3 phases, with the first launching after 2035 and joining the fleet by 2036. But the threats are growing. Pakistan keeps threatening to use nuclear weapons. China has 600 warheads and is expanding with a goal to reach 1,500 warheads by 2035. Global arms control treaties are expiring and India remains locked out of NSG. This has triggered a debate. Should India maintain no first use, or does the changing security environment requires more flexibility? Some argue restraint invites aggression, that we are seen as weak. But others warn that expansion can trigger unaffordable arm race like it did during the Cold War. So now India faces a choice. But what is clear is that India won't remain static. The technology will advance, threats will evolve, and India will adapt. For now, India's fundamental philosophy that the nuclear weapon exists to protect India, not dominate the world, is unlikely to change. India built nuclear weapons when the world said no. India stayed outside the NPT. India developed a nuclear triad under sanctions. India has the power to destroy but chooses not to unless you force its hand. After all of this, I think that maybe the true nuclear power isn't about how loud your bomb is. Maybe it's about how wisely you choose not to use it.